Hi, I'm Ed Merrison from Vininspo, and I'm here at the Elanto Vineyard in Balnarring on the Mornington Peninsula. Never heard of it? Well, you have now. And seriously, you'll probably be hearing a lot more about it because this is a young but highly ambitious project. These high-density Chardonnay and Pinot Noir vines were planted in 2019, and I'm here to speak to Sandro Mosele, the mastermind and co-owner of this. One of the key players credited with the quantum leap that occurred with Mornington Peninsula Pinot Noir around the turn of the century. His 30-plus year winemaking career has taken in the likes of Kooyong, Scorpo, and 10 Minutes by Tractor, and during that time he's imported a whole heap of knowledge and a lot more gathered over the years. Elanto is a no-compromise, no-expense-spared application of all those lessons, and this is what it's all about.
Well, I would say, in general, what I want from a wine is I do want as much concentration as I can get. I do want varietal flavours, but I also want to see that there's something of this place that is in these wines that may not be in wines from somewhere else. So some kind of expression of our volcanic soils and our aspect. One of the reasons we chose this site, I was looking for an easterly aspect, so I got halfway there by having a southeasterly. But I actually think that's actually helped us. We've got Western Port Bay just out there, a couple of kilometres, and on those warm days, we get this cooling effect each night. Not getting those hot nights, that's one of the reasons why we retain the acidity. You're also maintaining freshness in the fruit. So I don't want a wine to be big and concentrated, but to look like it's a little bit tired. I want it to be energetic and I want it to have freshness. And I think this site can do that. I think you've got to take a more worldly view if you're really chasing wine quality. So I never really had Mornington wines as my benchmarks. My benchmarks were wines from anywhere and everywhere. But I never saw the structure that I saw in good Burgundies in New World wines as a general rule. And I think the other thing that I would notice was the wines from Australia, they would finish with an acid finish. Wines that from Burgundy, they finish with a tannic finish. So it would be the tannins that was the driving force in those wines. And HD tends to give you wines that finish with tannin, not with acid. Certainly from what we've noticed so far. And I've seen that with some of the wines that have tasted out of Macedon. So I do think that the way you grow is what gives you that. I think Mornington can develop wines that have structure. But I just think with Pinot Noir, it's much, much harder to do when you don't have high density. Because those vines, I think, producing too much yield per vine. Whereas with the competition here, they're running at that 450, 500 grams per vine, but they're in balance. And, you know, the vine's not trying to keep growing shoots because it's got all this energy that's not going into fruit production. That whole competition element and that keeping those vines in balance within each other and keeping that ratio between the fruit and the foliage is very important in my view. I remember I went to Burgundy, I think it was 2001 for the first time, and a lot of things they did, you know, sorting barrels, maybe some bunches, you know, trying to maintain whole berries. A lot of that was coming in here and people were across it. But the obvious difference was the vineyard. You know, people like to say, well, that's their terroir, that's different. But the vineyard does help express that to us, especially the architecture of the vineyard and the way you run it, I think have a profound effect on that. I think HD today in Australia is about saying, well, what happens if you do that in Australia? And I think that's the path we went down. A few years after I got back from Burgundy, we did a vineyard where we reduced the vines within the row and we reduced the row's width down to be enough so that, you know, the narrowest track that we had could go down, which was still 2.2 metres. So we weren't prepared to take that full leap, but we did reduce the number of vines. And there was a difference that we noticed in those wines. So that was the start. And I think it's not until Michael, Dylan and Rob do what they're doing in Macedon around 2012-ish, I guess, that I realised, well, hang on, they've actually solved the equipment problem. They've gone out, they've got these nectar tractors, they've got all these ideas also around organics and all those sort of things. And that's when I say, well, I tiptoed into this, you know, 5, 6, 7 years earlier, but you can actually do it. And that's when I said, well, I really want to be a winemaker where I'm just making lots of volume at this particular quality level, or do I really want to take the next step? And, you know, we had a few forays into it until eventually I met the right person here and we were able to start this, I think it was 2018 when we bought the property. And this is what we did. After obviously a lot of import from People like Tim Brown, who was a close friend and did a lot of work here with me in the early days and really up until recently. So all that little detail, so there was a hell of a lot of detail that went into that. It's hard. It's expensive and it's hard. But when you can do it on a scale, like we've been able to do it, it does make these vineyards financially more attractive once they're established. It's not just the number of vines per hectare. For me, it's also the balance of the ratio between the row width to between vines. If you have like very wide rows, but you have vines very close, you could have a very high number. And there are a few vineyards that I've seen like that, but it's not effective use of high density. The way I see it, it's where you can create a finite space for those roots to grow. So if your roots are able to go 1.5 meters out into the middle of the row before the next vine comes in, I think that's too far in these sort of bigger soils. So I think if you're going to talk about high density, it's the balance and the ratio between the row width and the spacing between vines. And generally speaking, those numbers start at 9,000 to 10,000 per hectare. If you talk to soil scientists like Claude Bourguignon, he says that if your roots are just in the topsoil, those vines are going to be predominantly giving you varietal characters. If you can get roots into the subsoil, then they're going to more likely express the soil characters in your wine, what some people might refer to as terroir. So what I wanted to do was also to have roots that did go down. So you needed soils that allowed that, because there are some sodic soils around here, Mornington in particular, where that's not going to happen because it's too unfriendly to vines. So that eliminated most of the sedimentary soils, then put us onto the volcanic soils. And here we were able to find a site that has volcanic soils, but as you go down, the soil conditions do not get worse. In fact, they almost improve. The other observation was if you have only shallow roots, which vineyards with wide rows tend to have, especially if you've herbicided, because herbicide also promotes shallow roots, you have a faster uptake of nutrients from any fertiliser you might put down. You have a faster uptake of rain or irrigation, which can make berries swell, which can increase your yield, which can cause botrytis. And you have greater fluctuations in soil temperature, and roots really shouldn't be where soil temperature fluctuates too quickly. So there's a lot of benefits to having the roots further down. And we felt that there was a benefit, particularly in climates where sunshine's not a problem, like Mornington, to have a bigger engine, if you will. So to have a taller canopy, which in turn would impact, I think, the way the fruit developed, and not to have excessive trimming and all those sort of things. We had this theory, I think, between Tim and I, that if your post was X high, the cordon should be 1/3 that height, or no more than 1/3. So we had posts that were 1.5, 1.6 metres out of the ground, so we settled on 500. That also enabled us to have enough room under vine, because there's no herbicide used here, so to be able to mechanically work the soils as required. To give it a bit of background, I think the yield per vine is a very important number, irrespective of the density. Compared to the standard vineyard densities here, I think 2.5 metre rows and 1.5 to 1.8 vine spacings. If the crop at the same yield per hectare, we have each vine giving us 1/5 of those yields. There is a difference in the way that the canes are growing and the way the vines are growing. We find that lignification as a result happens up to a month earlier. So the vine basically ripens the fruit really easily. And I think as a result, we get more anthocyanins in the reds. In fact, we're able to preserve acidity and ripen and get flavour development. So the numbers I used to get, say, 12 Beaumet in a conventional vineyard, in terms of TA and pH, I'm now getting at 13. But I'm getting the flavour of 13, not the flavour of 12. And I'm picking earlier. I've never had fruit like this. The berries are smaller, they're more concentrated, the parameters are different. And I don't know that I was expecting to have higher acidities, but we do. High density is not what gives you what we're trying to produce, but without it, you can't produce it. So it's still got to be a good wine site that has a terroir that's worth expressing, hence why we had Claude out here. And then once you've got that, you've still got to look after the vines properly. The desire to be as organic and holistic as you can, your pruning methods. So all of those steps accumulate to where we get to in the end. So without that, you could have a high density vineyard and the wines could be horrible. They're going to be missing. So you must have that balance and that complete picture. We get the fruit from the vineyard, we pick it when we think it's at its optimum. Within 3 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks, the whole property's picked, and we pick it in about 10-ish picks. So it's all picked fairly quickly. And everything we do from that point is only going to reduce quality. So I've got to do everything I can to not lose quality along the way, so that by the time it gets to the glass, I've preserved as much as I can. The things that I think are really important, and for Pinot and Chardonnay it's slightly different, but we pick in little 10-kilo crates. The fruit comes down, it never goes into a half-ton bin because we want to keep the berries preserved and we don't want to crush or juice them. That's especially important for Pinot, less important for Chardonnay, where you're going to be going straight into the press anyway. But with Pinot Noir we do that. We try and process the fruit at the right temperature, so we have a cool room that enables us to adjust the temperature, and that's another disadvantage of half-ton bins, where you can have them in there for days and the middle's still hot. And then just having the right equipment. With Pinot Noir, we're trying to preserve whole berries, so we have a destemmer that's designed to give you whole berries. We use elevators, everything's done by hand really. And then it goes into concrete fermenters here. The reason for that is concrete fermenters are mainly calcium based. I love the influence of limestone on wine, especially Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but we don't have limestone. So concrete just gives it that little element that can just do a little bit of what limestone might do to the wine. And then the whole process of the ferment being, so many days cold before it starts, natural ferments, natural malos. We use very little whole bunch. Basically, we pick out off the sorting table the best bunches that we just don't want to go through the machine because they're too good. And they'll go in, that might be 3%. So it's a tokenism to a degree, but it does have a small impact. Whether we'll do more in the future, I don't know at this stage. I think as the vines get older, that ratio of lignification might change and that fruit might be better suited to some whole bunch treatment. How many days on skins? It might be 25 days, it might be 30 days, it might be 20 days, depending on what we think. And then off to barriques here. And the reason we use barriques and not larger format is because the wine has enough structure that it's actually better off in smaller format barrels. And that'll be a slowly as you go type process with new oak. But we are seeing that the wines can handle new oak far better because they're more structured and they've got concentration. How much we use, I think, is not set in stone. One of the beauties of this place is that where I worked at before in the past, you had parcels of fruit coming in, you were under pressure to get all the fruit in and get it picked at the right time, but you might run out of fermenter space and you're making a decision, am I going to hold that fruit? Am I not going to pick it for a couple of days? Am I going to press it out earlier? All that sort of stuff. That never happens here. Each tank gets used once only, and it can stay in there for 3 months for all I care. I'm not under pressure to do that. So we wanted to get rid of all the compromises as much as we could. And that's one of the reasons why the winery's on this footprint. The problem is you make your first wine, you think you've got it all down pat, and at the end of it you say, but we can do this and we can do that, and we should have done this and we should have done that. I really like the 24s, for example, but the 23s are quite different, and I'm sure the 25s are going to be different. So I don't think we're anywhere near knowing exactly what we're going to be doing in the future. It's still evolving, and with wine, you only get one shot a year, and it'll probably take 10 years before I can truly say we've got a style that we've got nailed down and that we're happy with. And that's probably not enough time, really, but hopefully I can do it in 10 years.